In this special topic, I will be answering different frequently asked questions about SQL Server In-Memory OLTP. I have indirectly answered some of these questions throughout the course, but I have decided to also include some of these questions in this lecture in order to provide a set of answers to different interesting questions you may have about SQL Server In-Memory OLTP. So the first question to answer is, what is SQL Server In-Memory OLTP? This is definitely one of the questions we have answered in the beginning of the course, but let's answer it again in this special topic. So SQL Server In-Memory OLTP is a powerful engine seamlessly integrated into the SQL Server engine, which is optimized for online transaction processing, that is OLTP. So In-Memory OLTP introduces specific data structures for optimizing the performance of OLTP workloads. For example, it introduces memory-optimized tables, natively compiled store procedures, memory-optimized table variables, and other related T-SQL constructs. Another question you may have: is there an additional cost for using In-Memory OLTP in SQL Server? The answer is, of course, no. So there is no additional cost for using In-Memory OLTP in SQL Server, given, of course, the fact that you have a SQL Server version and edition that allows you to use this functionality. We're going to discuss about the SQL Server versions and editions that support In-Memory OLTP in a subsequent slide in this special topic. So, besides that, it goes without saying that depending on the volume of data you will be processing in memory, you will also need to have the proper RAM capacity on the database server. So, by the time you are making use of this great technology in SQL Server, you will need to take into consideration possible needs for increasing the RAM capacity on the database server, but all that depends on the workload you want to process in memory. So it really has to do with the design you are going to implement along with using In-Memory OLTP. So another interesting question about In-Memory OLTP is, which versions and editions of SQL Server support In-Memory OLTP? In-Memory OLTP originally shipped with SQL Server 2014, and at that time it was only available in SQL Server 2014 Enterprise, Developer, and Evaluation editions. However, since SQL Server 2016 with SP1, this changed, and In-Memory OLTP has become available in more editions of SQL Server. So since SQL Server 2016 with SP1, In-Memory OLTP is now available in the following editions of SQL Server: Enterprise Edition, Developer Edition, Evaluation Edition, Standard Edition, Web Edition, and Express Edition. Of course, as also mentioned before, besides the fact that you may have In-Memory OLTP available in your SQL Server version and edition, you will also need to take into consideration potential indirect costs that will most probably have to do with additional computational resources, for example, RAM. So another basic question that we have also covered throughout the course is, what are memory optimized tables? So let's answer this question again in a simplified form. So memory optimized tables are special data structures in SQL Server that store their data into memory using multiple versions of each row's data. Now this technique is characterized as a non-blocking multi-version optimistic concurrency control and eliminates both locks and latches, thus achieving breakthrough performance because, as you may realize from this paragraph, you avoid having blockings in your memory optimized tables. Now, another question is, what happens to my data in memory when the database server is restarted or even crashed? Well, the answer here is it depends. So there are two scenarios regarding this question, which are directly related to the type of memory optimized tables that you use. And more specifically, it has to do with the fact where you may be using durable or non-durable memory optimized tables. And let me further clarify this. So the first option is where you create a durable memory optimized table which means that in the case of a server crash or failover, the data will be available because they will be recovered from transaction logs. So durable memory optimized tables, besides storing the data in memory, they also store the logs of all transactions on the disk in order to be able to reconstruct the table into memory in the case of a server failover or crash. Now, even though this may add an overhead to the overall processing, again, there are many workloads that this type of tables, durable memory optimized tables, are still much faster than the traditional disk-based tables. And the second option is to create non-durable memory optimized tables, which means that in the case of a server crash or failover, the data in the table will be lost. So you need to be careful when you design a solution using in-memory OLTP in order to, among others, take into consideration these two options and consequently the type of memory optimized table to use, durable or non-durable. Now, another common question about in-memory OLTP in SQL Server is what are natively compiled store procedures. So, natively compiled store procedures are SQL Server objects that can access only memory-optimized data structures such as memory-optimized tables, memory-optimized table variables, etc. So, natively compiled store procedures, as the name implies, are compiled to native code that is actually in DLL upon their creation, in contrast to interpreted store procedures where they are compiled at first execution. In addition to that, during the time that natively compiled store procedures are being created, certain aggressive optimizations take place during their creation. And all these make natively compiled store procedures much faster than the traditional interpreted store procedures. Another question, can in-memory OLTP improve the performance of any workload? Well, even though in-memory OLTP is a technology that can definitely help the performance of your SQL Server workloads, as the name implies, it is more suitable for OLTP workloads. And we're going to discuss about these types of workload in a subsequent slide in this special topic. So now let's proceed and see a set of suitable workload types that can benefit the most when they are processed using in-memory OLTP in SQL Server. So let's see some examples. One such example of a workload type is workload that features a high data insert rate. So for example, you can have smart metering solutions or system telemetry for which when you use in-memory OLTP, you will definitely have significant performance gains. Another workload type are workloads that feature read performance and scale. So social network browsing is one example of this workload type. Compute-heavy data processing is another workload type that can benefit the most when migrated to in-memory OLTP in SQL Server, and examples of this workload type include manufacturing supply chains or retailers. Other OLTP workload types that can benefit from in-memory OLTP in SQL Server are workloads that require low latency execution, for example, online gaming platforms and capital markets. Moreover, session state management is another workload type that can benefit the most when migrated to in-memory OLTP, and an example of such workload type is managing sessions, for example, user requests and other user actions for heavily visited websites. Now, another question is, how can I check if SQL Server in-memory optimization can improve the performance of my workload? So there are multiple techniques that can help you achieve what you are looking for. So, for example, you can read case studies in order to find other organizations or individuals that had similar workload types like yours and what they have achieved when migrating to in-memory OLTP data structures and processing SQL Server. You can perform different tests using in-memory OLTP in SQL Server by yourself, and you can play around in order to see potential performance gains when using this technology in SQL Server. You can use the Memory Optimization Advisor tool in SQL Server, as well as you can perform different simulations by using in-memory OLTP against your workload in a simulation environment. Another interesting question about in-memory OLTP that many people have is whether it is complex or not to use in-memory OLTP in SQL Server. The answer is definitely not. So it is very easy to use in-memory OLTP since the in-memory OLTP engine in SQL Server is seamlessly integrated in the SQL Server engine. So you just need to decide which tables will be defined as memory optimized tables, as well as which database processes will be migrated to natively compiled store procedures. Of course, this is something that requires careful analysis of your data processes and the structures involved. And the last question I have included in this special topic is, do I need to change my application's logic or code for using in-memory OLTP in SQL Server? The answer to this question is of course not. So you do not need to change anything in the application for using in-memory OLTP in SQL Server, because any changes, for example, switching to memory optimized tables and natively compiled store procedures, are performed only on the database level. So your application layer is not directly affected by these changes. So you do not need to change anything in your application's logic or code. Great. So I hope you found these frequently asked questions about in-memory OLTP in SQL Server and the answers I have provided useful, and that they have clarified many things about in-memory OLTP. If you have more questions, feel free to use the course's Q&A section. Thank you very much for watching this special topic.